up.
I have a really weak voice. It's part of old age, I think. I'm not sure. Anyways. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to get down to the South River over here. And when you're in Port Republic, the North River is the one you cross the bridge, and when you came into town, the South River is over here. There's a bridge. In 1862, there was no bridge. If you wanted to get across the river, you had to walk, okay? Or you had to ride a horse, or if you're cavalry or infantry, you did the best you could, okay? So what I wanted to do is take everyone down to where the middle ford was and start the history, and realizing that this is actually June 8th, 1862. So we're just shy of 164 years by a couple of days of the anniversary of this battle that takes this, I'm not sure if you call it a battle, we'll call it a skirmish, okay, that takes place in Port Republic. And it all kind of starts early in the morning with Stonewall Jackson being in a house that's burned in 1903. There's a replacement house. It's up at the end of Main Street where the road kind of curves and heads out as if you're going to the Stanton Road. And Stonewall Jackson gets up in the morning, goes out on the porch. It's about 7:30, and he hears something he wasn't expecting, artillery fire. And there had actually been an artillery piece that Union cavalry had brought along. They brought two of them. And one of them was just across the river. And what they did is they looked across the river and they said, there's some kind of structure over there that looks really, really suspicious. So rather than coming into town and surprising everyone, they pull up to the river and fire an artillery shot at what was then the church. So let's take a walk this way, okay? So we'll stop right here. So in 1862, this depression that you see right here ran all the way back up to there was a little island, still is, on the river up here. And there used to be water that coursed down through there. It was a mill race. And just down here, probably 80 yards or so, there was a factory that used the water in the mill race, and they produced cotton goods there. There was a foundry up at the other end up here, and actually you're standing on what would have back then been an island, actually. So if you look at the maps that we gave you, and let me see if I can pinpoint it for you. If you look at this map and you look right here where it says Middle Ford, you can see the mill race.
Oh, yeah.
And you can see something that says Slab Bridge. So over the mill race, somebody had placed a slab of stone so you could cross it with no trouble at all. But if we go down to the river down here, So if you look on your map, it shows an island. You can see the water kind of coming out around the island that's right there. And if you look at the map too, just over here to our right would have been a granite, what they called a granite slab. But if you wanted to get across the river, this is Middle Fort. This is where you would have done it in 1862. So about 8 o'clock in the morning on June 8th, 1862, there's a colonel. His name is Sprigg Carroll. And that colonel is leading about 150 cavalrymen and 2 artillery pieces here into Port Republic. And they're going to come up to the other bank over there. They're going to fire 1 artillery shell. It's going to hit the steeple on the church, and all that slate kind of covering that they had on the roof is going to come crashing down. And there's a man there who's a little bit disturbed by it. His name is Hunter McGuire, and Hunter McGuire is actually the personal physician, later on the personal physician of Stonewall Jackson. He's the one that attends to him after he's mortally wounded at Chancellorsville about a year later. So they announced their arrival. Now the river is pretty low. In 1862, the valley experienced, even now, its 3rd wettest spring. So the river here would have been a lot higher than it is right now. As a matter of fact, they determined that men couldn't walk across here probably without some type of temporary bridge. But if you were on horseback, you could pretty easily get across. So imagine it much deeper, much wider, with more water. And so when those Union cavalrymen show up, they're going to go ahead and cross the river here, bringing their artillery pieces into town and head directly in this direction. Jim, by the way, is going to do the next place that we stop. Jim Goecker, he's right here. And those Union cavalrymen are going to continue up this way right into the center of town. Jim is going to talk about Stonewall Jackson getting out of bed, coming out, trying to get his horse, and then riding through town. Jim does a really good job of explaining that. But I think if you're going to understand what goes on here, not only what happens in the morning here on June 8th, what happens on the night of June 8th into the 9th, when all of the men are going to go across this river, infantrymen, cavalrymen, artillery, they're going to cross this river. It's still going to be high that next night. And what are they going to do? They're going to roll wagons into the river right here, side by side. They're going to take planks and they're going to lay them across those wagons, and all the infantrymen are going to cross that way. What few cavalrymen that they have are just going to cross the river like the Union cavalry does on the morning of June 8th. So you have to look at this as being the prelude. It's the prelude to Jackson's narrow escape. It's also something that has to be accomplished or engineered in the overnight to get all the men that they need to over to Port Republic for the battle that's going to take place on June 9th. So it's an entryway and an exit for infantrymen only if they have a bridge to get across. If it's just throwing a person into that, they would have just washed downriver. The other thing you should know about Port Republic too is it's called port because it really was an inland port. Back in the early 1800s up to about 1879, they used to build boats here that were called gungalows. And the gungalows couldn't be any wider than 14 feet wide, but they sometimes were up to 90 feet long. So if you can imagine a boat that looks like a barge, 90 feet long, floating down these rivers, that's exactly what they did. There's one of them hitting a rock. So as you're going downriver with these boats, the North River and the South River here come together and it becomes the South Fork of the Shenandoah River from there on down. As they were going downriver, they would go all the way down to Harper's Ferry. And these big barge type boats that they built would navigate all the rapids and everything that you can imagine going downstream. And when they got there, they couldn't bring them back. So the boats actually were torn apart, and they would sell the lumber from the boats, and they would build houses in Harper's Ferry. Now the houses, some of them are marked in Harper's Ferry. They're called shipboard houses. But unless you know where the wood came from, you wouldn't know the rest of the story. Okay, now you know the rest of the story. That reminds me of somebody else saying that once. Anyways, so imagine this as being an entrance for cavalry. Those cavalry are going to come through here. They're going to bring 2 artillery pieces. They're going to send one towards the bridge. They're going to send one out straight out ahead and face it up the main street, which is the next road over. But this is where all of that narrow escape for Stonewall Jackson is going to start, about 8 o'clock in the morning on June 8th. Do you folks have any questions? Yes?
Sorry.
That's okay.
So we're Middle Ford.
We're at Middle Ford.
Was there any crossings at the Lower Ford?
There is, but this is the most commonly used one. It's the one that, when we go down to the bridge, where the bridge the old, covered bridge used to go across the river, we'll walk right by where the Lower Ford was, and if you look, you can't really see the water from there, but it was not one of the best fords or easiest ways to get across, and the reason being, the 2 rivers come together just beyond it, and as they do, this being the smaller of the 2, if it's in flood, or even if it's just normal water, the water coming in from this river tends to back up because it can't get enough momentum to get into the other river. And as a result, there is a Lower Ford, but if this is knee deep, that's like chest deep down there, okay? So that's why this one is used most often.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did Jackson have any troops guarding the fords?
He had, that's something Jim will probably mention. Yes, they had up here at the upper ford, for some reason this was unguarded. There were a couple of cavalrymen that were down at the Lower Ford. The 7th Virginia Cavalry actually had some men out here watching for the approach of cavalry or infantry. And when the 1st Union Cavalry showed up, because their commander had been mortally wounded a couple of days before on June 6th, their willingness to hang around just wasn't there. And so when the 7th Virginia Cavalry encountered Spring Carroll's men, they just hightailed it for the woods, never even bothered to send anyone to warn Jackson. One of those 7th Virginia cavalrymen was a 15-year-old boy, and he actually rode across here, rode up to Jackson while Jackson was standing on the, deciding what he should do. And he told Jackson, there's some Union cavalry coming. And Jackson looked at the boy and said, well, go fight them. All by himself, I guess, a 15-year-old kid, but, Anyway, that was Stonewall Jackson's way, which is the name of the road on the other side of the river, okay? Yes?
You mentioned the transporting of troops and cavalry and artillery. What about a commissary or quartermaster or medical field hospital? Did they have to get transported as well?
Well, the field hospital was actually the church up here at the time. All of their supply wagons and everything were actually up around the corner, up by where Jackson's headquarters was. That's a story for Jim to tell you, actually. What I'm doing is I'm dumping on Jim today. So
did when Ewell came to support Jackson, did he cross here?
He would have crossed right here. Okay. All of Ewell's men, which had been fighting that same day that this happened, would have that night come down and then crossed the river here. Your first troops to go across, I think they would have been the Stonewall Brigade. So, yes. And can you think of a prettier place to?
Oh, it's a gorgeous. Take it over.
Yeah.
I'm too lazy to take my phone.
That's okay.
It's beautiful. I was just curious. You said the cavalry crossed with 2 artillery pieces.
Yes.
What were they lending? Like Parrots?
They had 3-inch ordnance guns.
Were those like the small ones?
No, they're like the one that's over at Port Republic Museum right now, except they don't have the bands on the end. Those are Parrots over there. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, they have kind of a rounded off end on them, and they were 3-inch shells.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was surprised to see that one over at
Yeah, a lot of people have been.
Yeah.
Yesterday it was the busiest day I've had at the museum because everyone drove by and said, "What the? Why is there an artillery piece sitting here?"
That's the one they fucker.
So we had kids here last week, and we were talking about firing it, but somebody.
None of the kids would fit inside.
Yes. And the other thing was we're afraid of breaking windows in town.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yes.
Insurance might not cover.
Yes. Any other questions? Okay, watch out for that hole.
There's a couple, yeah, back down there.
And follow that man, he knows just where he's going. How are you this morning?
Good, how you doing?
Good to see you. No, not necessarily. I can recognize any artillery piece, but I can't tell you, I can tell you pretty close the ranges.
Yeah. The technology is really advancing quickly. We have war things to do that.
That's right. Yeah, as horrible as war is, it brings on so much innovation, militarily, the medical field.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I was in Sark there in the military.
Oh.
And warfare was gradually put it to boom.
Yeah.
There's like a little depression right now. That's where the house was. You still see some rock with the foundation inside the depression.
Well, appreciate everybody coming out. We will have a little bit of traffic, so just be aware. This is Main Street of Port Republic. So it gets really crazy here about 9:20 on a Saturday morning. But see, here comes the rush. So just be careful there as we begin. Well, as Pete said, they crossed and came right up that road, the street we just walked up, and the one artillery piece was placed here in the road, pointed to my left, your right. The other one was sent up to the bridge, which we'll go to here in a little bit. As you walk down, you can see it's a fairly long street, but you can almost see where it bends.
Yeah.
Where it bends to the right. And up on that hill would have been where Jackson was staying the night. Again, he's going to go to church service. He's going across the bridge to the camp, so across the river, because it's Sunday morning. And we all know Jackson was a very pious individual, very much about keeping the Sabbath. That's why he fought on Sundays all the time. But they started down here. So as Jackson is trotting here, remember the Pennsylvania Cavalry?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They're on that road we just crossed, going that way. Missed the perfect opportunity. But on the way, he stops here at this church. There had been fighting up in Harrisonburg. Of course, there had been fighting in the valley for some time. This was used as a field hospital where they would bring the men to recuperate. And since he had heard the cannon fire, he was thinking, we better move the men. And Hunter McGuire, his surgeon in charge, had already decided that. In fact, he was in a hurry. He had removed the windows so he could pass the litters through the window. It would be easier and quicker to carry out the men and what have you. Hunter was known as he was a good swearer. Let me put it that way. He cussed like a sailor, which Jackson, of course, didn't really appreciate. He liked McGuire, that sort of thing. So while Hunter was taking these soldiers out of the church, Jackson hears him, pulls over and admonishes Hunter about his language. Because several reasons. Jackson didn't believe in that. Number two was the Sabbath. And Hunter McGuire said, "I will try, sir." Probably not very hard, but he did have this exchange. So he continues down. The Pennsylvania folks will come out, look down that way, and they start heading that direction because what they can see, and it's hard to see with all the trees now, there's a hill up there. And that was the supply depot. That was where all the wagons were. That's where all the reserve artillery was. So as they're coming out looking down this way, they see easy pickings. They're going to go down and try and capture his reserve wagons. Because you can imagine, for Jackson, the way he marched, what have you, having supplies was very important. And of course, artillery was always important. So as they go down there is a provost guard in town. At the time, someone asked if the crossing was guarded and what have you. There were only about 25 men in the entire town, and they were here simply to guard the civilian homes and what have you, provide security so that nothing untoward happened. They've gathered down here. There's an artillery unit there that when they realize something's going on, they rally behind a stone wall. Right where the road turns, there would have been a stone wall there. So these 25 men or so get in behind that. Behind them, a battery rolled up a couple guns. They were handy and close. They moved up to repel. They can now see and hear something's going on with the cavalry. They can see them setting up artillery up here. So they're realizing that something bad is going to happen. By that time, the Pennsylvanians have turned and headed down this way. And the artillery unit had never fired their pieces, ever. They had never even loaded their unit, their battery, their guns. It was the first time ever for them. So they kind of figured it out and jammed something down in there, loaded it up, aimed it, they thought, fired the gun, and the shell went screaming out towards West Virginia somewhere. It was not an accurate fire, but it surely got the Pennsylvanians' attention. As they came up, they now realized there was artillery. They were being a little less excited about charging up there to get those wagons, but they do. And as they charge, up pops 25, which to the Pennsylvanians looked like 150, out behind this wall, and fired a volley. Well, that disrupted them. They weren't expecting that. They come running back to reorganize. And now there's a second shot. And now they go again, a little less eagerly than they did even before. Again, an exchange of fire, and by that point, the ardor is out of the Pennsylvanians. Sprigg Carroll, who was leading this, some say he had fortified his courage before crossing the river. There are people that say a young regular army officer was really the one that was commanding this detachment, a gentleman that some of you might have heard of, Miles Kehoe. Miles is known for being with Custer at the Little Big Horn.
Wow.
So Miles Kehoe, young regular army officer, has ridden along, and for most intents and purposes was probably the one that was calling the shots here in town. So now the Pennsylvanians are shook. Meanwhile, Jackson's already crossed the bridge. There is an old wives' tale that he had a conversation with the Union gun crew up here at the bridge. He crossed before the gun got there. But nonetheless, he'd gone over. Now he's hearing artillery and gunfire here in town, and he realizes he's got to send troops over here to deal with whatever's happening. So the 37th Virginia happens to be the closest to the bridge. It just started their service, and he rode up and said, "Sorry, gentlemen, not today. Well, the Lord will have to wait." He gathers them up and brings them towards the bridge, which is right at the end of this road. Any questions on this portion of what happened that morning?
I think Robert Dabney was Stonewall's chief of staff at that time.
Yes.
My understanding is that Dabney had a role in rallying these guys over here. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
A lot of his staff realized something was going on. Jackson already left, but they're trying to get the wagons out, get them away. The Teamsters themselves didn't really need any help to be told to leave. They took off and went helter-skelter in about as many directions as you could go. The artillery were beginning to pull out. A couple of them were trying to come into position. Just so happened that the one battery was kind of directed this way, at least a couple guns, that were able to return repulse the cavalry attack. But if you can imagine, 100, 120 cavalrymen clattering down this street, clattering might have been there, wouldn't have been the pavement obviously, but they're charging down through here, probably in a squadron front, maybe in company front, which would have only been about 40 or 50 across, maybe even tighter formation than that. I would be intimidated with an artillery piece shooting at me in that tight a formation. So we can fault them for false courage, but at the same time, it was probably a fairly real concern as they came up. And also remember, it's June, barely June of '62. Nobody has a heck of a lot of experience yet. Again, an artillery battery hadn't even loaded their piece yet, and they're on campaign. These Pennsylvanians had maybe chased a little bit around. Pete talks about the 7th Virginia out. They had lost Ashby Turner only a few days before, Turner Ashby only a few days before. I always describe Turner as more of a chieftain than a military officer. He led by personal charisma, and his men were not well trained, they were not well disciplined, and that was okay with Ashby. As long as they responded to him, he didn't really care. But because there was virtually no staff, he had 27 companies in the 7th Cavalry, the normal size would be 10 to 12. The word, what do we do next and who do we turn to, was really a very big question for these men. So you say, well, where was the cavalry? They were disoriented, they were not inclined to take orders from anybody else, and they kind of went out the hook, but they were basically lost because their chieftain was no more. So this is another part of these two battles of why were the cavalry? Where were the cavalry? The cavalry was very disorganized at this point, to the point of being almost immobile and not very useful at this moment.
Hey Jim, can I point out something?
No.
All right, I'm going to anyways. One of the things that happened is several members of Stonewall Jackson's staff rode with him down this way. And as the Union cavalry came around the corner, Hunter McGuire was actually on horseback here. And so what did they do? They captured him. What was the artillery chief? Anyways, they captured 3 members of Jackson's staff, including Hunter McGuire. And when that first charge went down through here, they took their captives with them. And so when they went charging down through here, Hunter McGuire, the doctor, was actually one of those people participating in the charge, okay? Not voluntarily, but he was a member of it. And so was their artillery chief, whose name I can never remember. It's because he was a terrible artillery chief.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. You're right. Thank you. Anyways, they're all part of the charge that goes down through here. Sorry, Jim.
No, it's a good point. Yeah. So yeah, it would have been kind of interesting if they'd have tried to keep going, whether they'd been shot down or not, because they're part of a charge on these men. But that's what occurs here. And we're talking about a few minutes. You know, this whole operation in this town doesn't last terribly long. And if Jackson had not been here and almost captured and what have you, we might not even be standing here today describing what happened. But he was, and we're here because of that. So again, artillery piece sitting right at that entrance where we came out, right there on Main Street, pointed this way. We're going to go down to the bridge setting where the other artillery piece was, and where more exciting things happen, and Pete's going to tell you all about that. Great. Oh, question.
Not yet.
Question.
So, Hunter McGuire eventually escaped, right?
He does.
Yeah.
When the cavalry they leave here,
Yeah.
they just want to get out of town. They don't care about captives anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, the retreat from here is as disorganized as the Teamsters at the other end running away. They were kind of...
And just for clarification, Jackson indicate captured because the Pennsylvanians are going down Water Street and Jackson's going up this street. Is that right? So they kind of passed each other.
Correct.
Now, what the Pennsylvanians eventually got on this road and went this way?
Yeah, as they were riding along, they could see the hillside, they could see all the wagons. A lot of these wagons had just been captured. They're brand new, old, not old, but they've been Union wagons. That's right. Nice, clean, white canopies on them, hard to miss. So when they come down and they look over there, they see easy pickings.
Well, who commanded the 37th? Colonel, maybe?
I do not. 37th, who was commanding?
Ernie?
Good question.
I might be wrong, okay?
He's the only person who's ever asked that.
I didn't bring my crook along.
Brian, okay? I mean, you got crutch. I'm here to learn, okay?
All right.
I gave a
Anything
tour
else?
last week to his daughter-in-law, or his direct descendant
Pete?
at Jackson Museum.
Yes.
Her maiden name is Crutchfield. Oh my God.